Hello, Crime Squad. I'm so glad you're here and ready to listen to this week's episode of Crime Squad Podcast. If you're just tuning in now, I recommend you stop and go back to the first episode of this series, The Devil's Playground, Part 1. This episode is Part 3 of the series. If you've been listening, thank you so much for tuning in with me. Crime Squad Podcast is truly a passion project, and I'm happy to be able to give a voice to the victims of violent crime. Please consider rating and following the podcast if you like what you've been hearing, as it really helps the show. And let's be honest, it's a huge motivator for me. I like to know if I'm hitting the right notes with my squad. Okay, squad, let's get into today's episode, Part 3 of the special series, The Devil's Playground. As a quick refresher, the Devil's Playground is the infamous name given to the Exeter Jail, also known as Elgin Middlesex Detention Center, or EMDC. This location, located just off Exeter Road in London, in the city I call home, has come under fire for the large number of deaths that have occurred on site. The jail houses not only convicted criminals, but also people awaiting trial for crimes they have not yet been proven guilty of. The location was originally built to house 150 inmates, but numbers are well over 400 in today's world, with many one-person cells being repurposed to house 2 or 3 inmates at a time. So far, this series has covered the deaths of Randy Drysdale, Laura Strawn, Adam Kargus, Keith Patterson, and Jamie High. Part 3 of this series will illustrate how ill-equipped the EMDC is at preventing deaths related to substance use, and the subsequent recommendations after the inquiries into the deaths of 3 individuals were explored by a coroner's inquest. Before we begin, this episode contains details that may be distressing to some viewers, such as discussion of criminal activity as well as substance use and suicide. If you need support, know there are resources out there for you. For access to immediate, free, and confidential mental health and substance use help 24/7, contact Wellness Together Canada at 1-866-585-0445 or by texting wellness to 741-741. Okay, squad, let's get into the stories of Floyd Deliri, Justin Thompson, and Raymond George Major. Canada is facing an opioid crisis. Opioid use isn't new in Canada, but the use and abuse is shining a light on the devastating effects opioid drugs are having on not only individuals, families, but also entire communities across Canada. Some harrowing facts from the Government of Canada. Since 2016, there have been more than 9,000 opioid-related deaths. In 2017, approximately 11 lives were lost each day because of opioid overdoses. 94% of opioid overdose deaths happen by accident. For those of you who haven't had experience with opioids, I'll give you a quick pharmaceutical lesson. Opioids are pain-relieving drugs and can cause feelings of euphoria or a high feeling, which can cause them to be abused. Typically, these are prescribed drugs to individuals that require pain management for moderate to severe pain, whether short-term or long-term. The problem with drugs that reduce pain is that over a period of time, your body actually becomes tolerant to dosages. This means often dosages need to be adjusted to ensure the medication is working as designed. And the up feeling people get when taking these prescription drugs makes it easier to start taking more than's required. For others, the draw to sell the drugs is lucrative because of the amount of money you can make doing it. As I've mentioned many times on this podcast, substance use and abuse is not something people actively set out to do. It isn't a life goal to become addicted to something. The problem with opiates, stopping them can be extremely difficult because there are physical withdrawal symptoms that are difficult to manage through. These effects can include chills, insomnia, diarrhea, sweating, body aches, nervousness, widespread or increased pain, irritability and agitation, nausea, and stomach pain. In Canada, many street drugs have become tainted with one of the most powerful opioid drugs, the big F, fentanyl. Fentanyl is a powerful drug. In fact, it is 20 to 40 times more potent than heroin and 100 times more potent than morphine. The risks of accidental overdose with fentanyl are very high. It is odorless and tasteless and is often mixed with drugs like heroin or cocaine. The scariest part is that only a small dose of fentanyl can kill you. According to the Canadian Opioid Crisis Fact Sheet, tiny little specks equivalent to a few grains of salt is enough to kill a person. Floyd Dellery was 39 in 2015, and he had a notoriously bad reputation. He was known to be a career criminal, and according to an article in the London Free Press, he was, quote, arguably the most dangerous person in London's criminal community, end quote. When Floyd was only a teenager, he was convicted of manslaughter for killing a man with a baseball bat. He eventually joined the Outlaws Biker Club, and from there he became well known for his ability to smuggle guns across the border. Many people feared Floyd Dellery, and Floyd liked that because he knew where he stood. By all accounts, he liked to intimidate. He liked to get away with criminal acts, but also didn't seem to mind when he was caught and subsequently jailed for his actions. He was most notably known for his role in a home invasion, a crime that led him to be sentenced to a stay at the Elgin Middlesex Detention Center. He was there for 6 years while awaiting his sentencing. It was a big deal because his sentence would determine whether or not he would be classified as a dangerous offender. If he was, he likely would never be let out of prison. The offense in question dated back to May 8, 2009. Floyd and 2 other males decided they wanted to rob a drug dealer associated with one of the men at his apartment in London, Ontario. I don't know whether or not the men were aware the dealer had company, but inside the home, along with the dealer, was his girlfriend, their infant daughter, and the girlfriend's sister. This didn't stop the men from carrying out the home invasion, and Floyd actually held a gun to the girlfriend's head while the other 2 men tied up both the dealer and his girlfriend. The men forced the sister to look for money in the house, and they were angry when the sister produced a lot less cash than they were hoping for. This angered the men so much that they threatened to kill everyone at the house. Floyd, with the help of one of the other males, stole the girlfriend's car and then decided to invade the home of the dealer's parents. Once again, the occupants of the residence were tied up and robbed at gunpoint. In 2015, Floyd was convicted of 31 charges related to this case. It took 6 years for the case to get through the court system. Despite all this notoriety, it is said that just beneath the tough exterior and terrible temper was a very smart, cunning man who could also be quite charming. Floyd's lawyer, Gord Cudmore, represented him for 5 years while the home invasion case made its way through the system. He said of Floyd, quote, "From the day he was born, he never had a chance, and he's living proof of how badly we treat our native Canadians," end quote. Unfortunately, Floyd's story is like so many others who start to live a life of criminality. Floyd knew only violence growing up. He had an absent father, and there weren't many positive male influences in Floyd's life. Even while incarcerated for different crimes, Floyd had issues with his treatment while behind bars. He often spoke up in court to try to have the judges understand what he was up against. He was often moved around from jail to jail. It was in the mid-2000s, while serving time in Hamilton, Ontario, that Floyd was attacked and suffered multiple stab wounds. During the home invasion trial, it was obvious something within Floyd had changed. He often appeared in court in a wheelchair and was hooked up to a catheter. It seemed like Floyd became a mere shadow of his former self. The intimidation factors had dulled. In another stay at a Hamilton jail, Floyd suffered a serious head injury when he was beaten. He believed this head injury had changed the violent parts of his persona, and this was backed up by his lawyer, Gord Cudmore, who said he believed the head injury did, in fact, change Floyd. It made him kinder and gentler. Though he was quick to say Floyd wasn't a kind and gentle person, just that the injury had created more understanding where Floyd was concerned. Suddenly, on August 23rd, 2015, Floyd's life ended very quietly at London's EMDC. The culprit was not another inmate delivering a beating or challenging Floyd for criminal standing. The culprit was fentanyl, and it's unknown how Floyd got it or how he used it. In fact, details about Floyd's death were only revealed to his family members in March of 2020. 5 years after he was transported to Victoria Hospital in London and later pronounced dead, the inquest into Floyd's death was published. The coroner's determination revealed guards at the EMDC found Floyd in his cell in medical distress. He was transported to Victoria Hospital, where he later died of a fentanyl overdose. Floyd's niece, Raquel Hilliker, revealed to CBC Canada that the family wasn't even made aware of the circumstances around Floyd's death until the inquest. For years, they suffered through not knowing. And when they found out what killed him, Raquel said, quote, "To know that he had an acute level of fentanyl in his system is a shock to us," end quote. Floyd, with his troubled upbringing, lived a hard life riddled with crime. A life filled with a series of choices that led him down various paths. It's a very stark contrast compared to how his life ended. EMDC guards found Floyd in medical distress on August 23, 2015, and when he was transported to the hospital, his soul quietly slipped into the afterlife, leaving only his physical body behind. The end of a career criminal at the hands of a powerful and deadly opioid. His time of death is listed at 8:46 p.m. on August 23rd, and the cause is determined to be acute fentanyl toxicity. Floyd left behind his mother, Karen Antone Hilliker. He had 13 siblings in total and a plethora of nieces and nephews. He rests now in the Colborne Chippewa Band Cemetery on the Munsee Reserve. Justin William Thompson was 27 years old in the year 2016. Justin had his challenges while growing up, like many of us do. Justin grew up in Wingham, but attended high school in Stratford. According to Justin's stepmother, Liz Thompson, Justin grew up with learning difficulties and was later diagnosed with a learning disability. He also struggled with emotional issues and emotional regulation, which was prompted by his parents getting a divorce. It's unknown at what age this happened, but divorce can be a major issue for children. There are so many factors that can be difficult for children to process. There's the breakup of the family unit, and for a child who has always had both parents present, it can be a major and catastrophic change, requiring major adjustments. If the divorcing parties aren't amicable, the emotions surrounding this are not only extremely hard on the people getting divorced, but children are generally part of custody battles or have to bear witness to the pain and hurt everyone goes through when a marriage dissolves. Justin found an outlet, though. Unfortunately, that outlet was in the form of substance abuse. For many years, Justin was a person who suffered from addiction. There were periods when he wanted to attain sobriety. He'd actually attempted on more than one occasion to go to rehab and get sober. As we've talked about before in other episodes related to addiction, people suffering from substance use issues are generally more prone to committing crimes, from petty crimes to more serious offenses, to be able to feed their need for drugs. This was the path that Justin took, like many others in his shoes, and he served time multiple times at EMDC for petty crimes. Mixed into the years of trying to numb himself by getting high, Justin was still a person who loved family. He was loyal to his family, and they were loyal right back. He attempted to make something of himself by becoming an apprentice bricklayer. His family believed he could get better. They held on to the hope that they could help him, which is why they so often bailed him out of jail when he was arrested. But there does come a breaking point for every family member, friend, or loved one. And Justin's family made the very difficult decision that enough was enough. They weren't going to be his lifeline anymore. It was time for Justin to recognize the gravity of the situations he was getting himself into and to take responsibility for his actions. His stepmother, Liz, said, quote, "This is the hardest part. We would always bail him out of jail. We agreed this time, do not bail him out. He needs to dry out and get into rehab." He would call repeatedly, daily, and leave messages. We wouldn't take his phone calls because he would want us to bail him out. End quote. After all, this time, Justin was arrested for failing to provide fingerprints to police, which was a minor technicality. The circumstances surrounding his stay at EMDC were that Justin had been charged with a break and enter. He was released on bail, but failed to follow up with police by providing his fingerprints. Now, interestingly enough, Justin was actually acquitted for the break and enter, but because he had breached the terms of his bail by not providing fingerprints, he still had to go to court for this infraction, and he ended up receiving a 21-day sentence. On October 30th, 2016, video surveillance at EMDC would capture a set of events that would lead to a devastating conclusion. In the video, a guard is seen letting an inmate out of their cell to change the channel on the TV. To change the channel on the wall-mounted TV, a remote had to be used, and the remote was attached to a string to keep it from getting lost or taken. On the way to the TV remote, the inmate is seen in full view of the guard untying some kind of package which was attached to the underside of a table. The package is then tossed by the inmate into cell number 3. And who did cell number 3 belong to? If you're following, it belonged to Justin Thompson, who on October 31st, the very next morning, was found lifeless in that cell. He had only 10 days left of his 21-day sentence. Justin's cellmate was Warren Williams, a 45-year-old man from Sarnia who was charged with first-degree murder for the murder of a 26-year-old man named Justin Pike on March 25th of 2016. Warren was found in medical distress and transported to Victoria Hospital along with Justin. Only Justin didn't make it, and Warren was left clinging to life. Justin's date of death is officially noted as October 31st at 7:59 a.m. at Victoria Hospital. The cause is listed as acute fentanyl toxicity and cocaine toxicity by the means of an accidental overdose. Justin leaves behind his parents, Kent and Tammy, and stepmother Liz. He had 6 siblings and was an uncle to 4 children. The last person in this episode, episode 3 of the special series The Devil's Playground, is Raymond George Major. Raymond's substance use story is just another example of how using illicit substances can consume a person and change them into someone unrecognizable. In the very dark days of my own personal battle with substance use, I recall not recognizing the person I saw in the mirror. Who was she? She had an air of desperation around her, a dullness to her eyes. She wasn't the happy-go-lucky, smiling person I used to be, and am now that I've been in recovery for over 10 years. I found a very informative interview with Raymond's former wife, Laura, in the St. Thomas Times-Journal, published in 2017. A big part of why I was so captivated reading it was not only because it allowed me to learn about who Raymond was, but also that Laura's own perceptions of people who used drugs was challenged as she watched the man she loved spiral into a downward descent. Laura met Raymond in 1997 in the city of Sudbury, Ontario. At this point, Raymond was already using prescription painkillers, but he wasn't abusing them. He admitted to Laura he'd experienced a very traumatic event. In 1993, Raymond had been driving while impaired with 3 friends as passengers. Raymond ended up hitting a train, which killed one of the passengers and brutally injured himself and the 2 others. As a result of this collision, Raymond would have multiple surgeries to rebuild most of his right side. He also served 2 years, less a day, in jail. Laura remembers Raymond was taking Percocets, which is known to be the gateway drug into stronger opioids. Many people who are addicted to opioid medication start with Percocet. And I do want to call out, these were prescribed drugs to Raymond by a doctor. The couple decided at some point they would move to London, Ontario around 2007. Unfortunately, in 2007, London was already experiencing the first opioid crisis, which was steadily moving forward because of the prescription painkiller OxyContin. I can attest to this because during my active addiction, I abused Percocet first, then moved on to OxyContin. My method was to crush the pills and inhale them. This was before the drug was replaced by a tamper-resistant version called OxyNeo, which was created so the pill could not be crushed or used for other purposes other than taking them orally as designed and prescribed. As the opioid usage soared in London, crystal meth came in at a close second. Raymond followed along the same path as many of us who were using at that time, but again, these were originally his prescriptions for pain management. Percocets to OxyContin to fentanyl patches, all prescribed by a doctor. He also dabbled in crystal meth, which obviously was not prescribed. As the medication he was given became stronger in dosage, Raymond wanted more. He needed more. This is how prescription drugs, as I explained earlier, lure people in, and then before you know it, you're hooked and you can't get enough. Raymond began to break down his fentanyl patches, and he would smoke the fentanyl from them. This was obviously not an approved usage of the prescription. Laura, Raymond's wife, admits she enabled by believing Raymond when he said he didn't have a problem. Quote, I just turned my head to it because he always said he had a hold over it. I knew he didn't, but I just didn't want to deal with it. He kept running into the wrong people. It's easy to get. End quote. However, things were coming to a head for Laura when she realized Raymond had taken up injecting drugs via hypodermic needle. At some point, one of the people he ran with introduced him to injections, and Raymond was hooked. He would try to get his hands on anything, from Dilaudid to hydromorphone, and anything else he could take if those weren't available. In 2015, Laura had had enough. She separated from Raymond, but still wanted him home for the holidays so he could visit his daughter and granddaughter. She also set herself up to be a safe space from people in Raymond's drug world so he could hide himself away if needed. The challenge when someone is in active addiction is sometimes they have moments where they become the old them again. And this is what Laura had to say about Raymond, quote, there were times when the real Ray shone through. He was a funny guy. He was like a comedian. He was funny and caring, end quote. Unfortunately, Raymond began to slip away, and he stopped visiting his granddaughter. Laura was hit with a scary reality when she would find bags upon bags upon bags of needles hidden in their shed or the house. Raymond was deep into it. He started to pawn a number of tools he had from being a former machinist to get money for drugs. He started stealing jewelry from Laura, and he would even sell some of his opioid medications, and he started losing the ability to work. He began to find solace in crashing with other people who also abused substance. There's strength in numbers. Laura tried not to give up on Raymond. She is a woman who has seen a lot, more than anyone should have to endure. One thing that really stuck with me was when she's describing the horrors she's seen before. Laura says, quote, I can't even tell you the stuff I've seen. I've been in hellholes finding him. I've walked in and there's blood shooting out all over the place. They're shooting up and there's blood shooting out of their necks. End quote. For those of you who live in London, maybe in a nice subdivision or a richer part of town, is it hard to imagine that this is your London? I think it's important to note it is. Like many places, there is often an underbelly, and it's ignorant to think otherwise. Eventually, Raymond started injecting fentanyl when it made its way to London. Laura watched fentanyl destroy her home and her family. She watched it kill her husband. It left total devastation in its wake, like so many others who have seen loved ones succumb to fentanyl overdose. On June 2nd, 2016, Raymond was arrested when police found him in a stolen vehicle with drugs in his possession. He also didn't have proper ID. He was taken to EMDC at the start of a weekend lockdown. Over the next 4 days, inmates watched on as Raymond suffered through opioid withdrawal with no assistance. It would have been excruciating. Laura had seen Raymond go through withdrawal once before, off hydromorphone. He would feel like he was freezing to death. He would throw up. He would be depressed. And she thinks of him suffering through all of this alone in a jail cell. On June 6th, Raymond attempted to hang himself using a strip of fabric from his blanket. He was transported to Victoria Hospital, like so many other inmates, But he wouldn't recover. He wouldn't wake up again. Raymond's granddaughter put it best. At only 10 years old, she was shy to speak to the journalist taking down the story of her beloved papa. Instead, she wrote her feelings down, and these words said, "I'm so angry at the guards for letting this happen. He should have been in 24/7 supervision. They must have thought he was an addict with no point to live." Let's talk about the coroner's inquest completed in 2020. It was the inquest into the deaths of Floyd Deliri and Justin Thompson. In a coroner's inquest, a death is investigated and a jury comes forward with recommendations based on the cause and nature of the death. When the inquest was delivered, the jury made numerous recommendations. The first of which recommends the Ministry of the Solicitor General should consider replacing Elgin Middlesex Detention Center with a new, modern facility designed to adequately accommodate with dignity the inmate population and to provide the environment with a suitable space in which inmates may achieve rehabilitation and reintegration through training, treatment, and services designed to afford them opportunities for successful personal and social adjustment in the community. Now, I know that's a mouthful, but I really could not have said it better myself. This recommendation specifically was asked of the jury within the coroner's inquest by Floyd Deliri's niece, Raquel Hilliker, and the family of Justin Thompson. The recommendations also included things like EMDC exploring the installation of electronic devices capable of monitoring vital signs and alerting staff and healthcare personnel when an inmate's vital signs indicate medical distress. They also recommended the staff conduct security checks more than twice per hour and at irregular intervals. They also recommended ensuring the jail is equipped with a proper infirmary. The ministry should conduct a healthcare needs assessment to ensure sufficient physician and nursing staff coverage to meet the healthcare needs of the inmate population. I don't know about you, but all of these sound like basic rights that should already be part of the prison system. Although the jury can make recommendations, the province doesn't have to enforce them. Food for thought, though. Over 69 recommendations were submitted to the jury for consideration. The lawyer who represented the Ministry of Community Safety and Correctional Services, Lorenzo Policelli, took issue with dozens of the recommendations. And get this, Policelli didn't want the jury to consider the recommendation of putting emergency call buttons in every cell, nor did he want them to consider that naloxone should be provided to all staff who interact with inmates. For reasons unknown, Policelli asked that the jury not consider the recommendation of EMDC implementing a harm reduction model when it comes to the treatment of inmates who misuse substances. A lawyer named Vilkos Gogar, who represented the Prison Harm Reduction Coalition, argued that the jail absolutely needs a harm reduction model. He said, quote, "We need to approach the issue of drug use by people in prisons as a healthcare issue first, not a security issue. Naloxone has never killed anyone. It has only saved people's lives," end quote. Coroner Dr. David Eden has presided over many, if not all, of the inquests made against the EMDC. Dr. Eden spoke to the jury in the inquest for Floyd and Justin and left them with a lesson in perception. Dr. Eden recalled an experience he had while working in a busy emergency room. There was a man who was acting out in a manner that caused him to be labeled as psychotic, violent, and extremely threatening. Dr. Eden decided to ask for help from a colleague who happened to specialize in addiction. And he watched as this colleague, over the course of an hour, was able to talk down the aggressive and dangerous male into a calmer, more reasonable state of being. Dr. Eden was shocked at the contrast and asked his colleague how he'd been able to respond in such a way, leading with patience and kindness. The colleague then explained something that changed how Dr. Eden viewed addiction and handling patients who are substance users. The colleague told Dr. Eden he had been in that patient's position only 5 years earlier. As many of you know, and I'm sure it's a broken record at this point, but I can fully attest to coming out on the other side of addiction. I went from no prospects, dropping out of college, living recklessly, committing petty crimes to fuel my 4-year addiction, to hitting rock bottom and clawing my way out of the black pit of despair into a comfortable life with a loving partner, a great career, and a mother of 1, soon to be 2 children. I couldn't agree more with Dr. Eden when he said, quote, "As a society, let's do what we can to help opiate abusers get to the other side of this illness, and let's keep them alive until they get there." End quote. So that's going to do it, folks. This concludes the 3rd installment of the special Crime Squad podcast series, The Devil's Playground. There are still several episodes to go. If you recall, I'm planning to cover the cases of the 20 deaths at EMDC since 2009. Sprinkled in there, though, there'll be regular content, which, again, I release bi-weekly on Fridays. You can slap my wrist this time. I'm fully aware it is Tuesday. I know I'm late. But I got a lot going on in my world. So I won't do that again, though. I plan to be on schedule going forward. If you like the way I write and tell these stories, or if Canadian true crime is your jam, be sure to subscribe to Crime Squad Podcast. You can listen wherever you get your podcasts. If you have an idea for a story or case you want me to cover, flip me an email at crimesquadpodcast@gmail.com or slide into my DMs through my Instagram at crimesquadpod. I have vacation off work this week, and in true crime nerd fashion, I am most looking forward to writing and researching podcast episodes. And of course, at some point, planning to lounge in one of my family members' pools. 'Tis the season. Thanks so much for listening, and remember, stay safe and be kind to each other.